You are listening to File '07. Now, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and brace yourself for terror. When the first message appeared on my phone, I thought it was a mistake. It was almost 3 in the morning, and the exhaustion from a week buried in piles of reports and endless investigations was already weighing me down. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the suffocating silence of my apartment. The dim light of the screen lit up the dark room. I grabbed the device, thinking it was some idiot colleague sending memes at an ungodly hour. But what I saw made me freeze. "You didn't save her, detective. Why do you think you deserve peace?" I read those words 3 times. The accusatory, almost cruel tone hit me like a punch to the gut. Still groggy, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what it meant. "Who are you?" I quickly typed, but there was no response. Minutes later, when I tried calling the number, I received an automated message saying the phone didn't exist. How was that possible? The name Evelyn flashed in my mind like lightning. It had been 5 years since the case that defined my career and my life. Evelyn Ramos, a college student who disappeared, whose parents I had promised to bring her back to. But all I found was her body, abandoned in an industrial warehouse, with a trail of blood that still haunted me. The guilt had never left. Even now, my nights were interrupted by nightmares of her lifeless eyes staring at me. I got up and went to the kitchen, needing a strong coffee to chase away the nausea creeping in. As the coffee maker bubbled, I mentally replayed the case. No one knew how much it had affected me. The press turned me into a hero for capturing the killer, a man named Jonas Vargas, who was now rotting in prison. But what no one knew was that I always felt something was wrong. Jonas had confessed to the crime, but the evidence never fully aligned. And now, this message. Someone was poking at a wound I could barely endure. When I returned to the bedroom, there was something else waiting for me. Another message, this time with an attached photo. I opened the file, and my heart stopped for a moment. It was a picture of Evelyn's crime scene, but from an angle that was never released to the public. "How the hell?" I murmured, feeling a bead of sweat slide down my temple. Whoever this was either had access to confidential files or had been there the night she died. You don't know everything about that night, detective, but you can find out. Start where it ended. The attached address was familiar. The warehouse where Evelyn's body had been found. The message felt like a challenge, an invitation to reopen wounds I had spent years trying to close. And as much as my mind screamed at me to ignore it, something inside me knew I couldn't let this go. Whoever it was knew too much, and what if they were right about something I had missed? I grabbed my gun and badge. It was still the middle of the night, but the echo of those words made it feel like the case had never ended. With one last look at the phone, I took a deep breath and walked out. I was heading straight into the heart of the night, and somehow, I knew I wouldn't come back the same.
The warehouse was about 20 minutes from where I lived, but the road seemed to stretch longer with every mile I drove. The hum of my car engine was the only sound cutting through the silence of the early morning. My mind raced, replaying details of Evelyn's case that I had tried to bury. What had I missed? Who could be behind these messages? When I arrived, the air was heavy, thick, with a sticky humidity that clung to my skin. I parked at a safe distance and stepped out. The warehouse looked exactly as I remembered it. A rusted metal structure abandoned in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by tall weeds. Even after all these years, the place still carried an aura of desolation and something deeper, something that felt alive, as if the building itself held secrets. I turned on my flashlight and walked toward the entrance. The beam flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Each step echoed on the concrete floor. The metallic smell of rust and something decayed lingered in the air. My heart pounded in my chest, but my training kept me grounded. Control your breathing, I told myself. Stay focused. Inside, the warehouse was silent. But then I noticed something that didn't belong. Fresh footprints in the dusty floor. I crouched down to examine them. The prints were recent, still clear, leading toward the back of the building. Who else had been here? And why? I followed the trail of footprints, but before I could reach their destination, something on the floor caught my eye. A piece of paper, carefully folded, rested near one of the columns. I picked it up cautiously, using a makeshift tissue to avoid contaminating potential evidence. I unfolded it, and before I even finished reading, my stomach dropped. You still don't know what you did, but soon you will. Everyone will. A wave of anger mixed with fear hit me. Who was playing games with me? And why were they using Evelyn's case as ammunition? I needed to think fast. I pocketed the note and pressed on. If their goal was to unnerve me, they were succeeding, but I wasn't going to back down. When I reached the back of the warehouse, something was different. A new door, reinforced, had been installed. This wasn't here before. I tried the handle, but of course, it was locked. I shone my flashlight through a small gap, but all I could see was darkness. It felt like this space had been designed to repel intruders, to keep something for someone hidden. As I prepared to force the door open, a sound made me freeze. A low creak, almost like a whisper, echoed behind me. I spun around, my hand instinctively going to my holster. My flashlight swept across the empty space. Is someone there? My voice cut through the silence, but the only reply was a faint echo. I was being watched. I was certain of it. The feeling of unseen eyes tracking my every move was so tangible it nearly made me forget to breathe. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I almost dropped it as I pulled it out. Another message. Think carefully before you open that door. Some secrets are better left buried. The tone was a warning or a threat. My instinct screamed at me to back off, but my resolve pushed me forward. I took a deep breath, adjusted my flashlight, and started forcing the handle. The screech of metal felt deafening in the silence. When I finally managed to open the door, what I saw knocked the air out of my lungs. There, in the center of an almost empty room, was a single chair, and tied to it was a man I didn't recognize. His eyes were wide, and a strip of tape covered his mouth. Around his neck, a plastic collar was attached to something that looked like a homemade bomb. "What the hell is this?" I muttered, my mind reeling. Before I could act, a small monitor on the left flickered on, and a recording began to play. The voice was distorted but clear enough to make my skin crawl. "You have 30 minutes to make the right choice, detective. He lives, or he dies. It's up to you." And then, the monitor went dark, and the silence returned. But the sound of my own breathing, heavy and uneven, was deafening. I was caught in a deadly game, and the only thing I knew for certain was that time was against me. The monitor went dark, leaving only the beam of my flashlight illuminating the man tied to the chair. His eyes were locked on me, filled with terror, as if I were the only thing standing between him and death. Every passing second felt like an eternity as my mind raced to process what was in front of me. The collar around his neck wasn't a bluff. I had seen similar devices in past operations, crude but deadly. "Stay calm, man. I'll get you out of here." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He tried to move, but the ropes held him firmly in place. I leaned closer to examine the bomb. It was small but well crafted, with wires leading to what appeared to be a hidden trigger behind the chair. One wrong move, and it was over. This isn't the work of an amateur, I thought, my pulse quickening. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was even shorter. "Choices have consequences, detective." The idea that someone was watching me sent a shiver down my spine. Slowly, I scanned the room with my flashlight, looking for hidden cameras. If there were any, they were expertly concealed. The man tied to the chair began to whimper, his muffled cries barely audible behind the tape covering his mouth. Tears streaked down his face. "Listen to me. You need to stay calm. I'll figure out how to disarm this." But how could I? No tools, no backup, and an invisible clock ticking away. My mind raced. There had to be a clue. I swept the room, desperate for anything that might help. That's when I noticed something scrawled on the back of the door I'd forced open. A sequence of numbers, written hastily in what looked like charcoal. 4321. I memorized it, though its meaning was unclear. A code, a password, or just another riddle meant to throw me off. As I tried to decipher it, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video. I pressed play. The shaky footage sent a chill down my spine. Evelyn's house, years ago, on the night of her death. Someone had recorded the exact moment I left the crime scene. My shoulders tense, burdened by the guilt of failing to protect her. The camera lingered on me, as if accusing me of being responsible. You saw it, but you chose to ignore it. The message accompanying the video hit me like a punch to the gut. Saw what? What were they talking about? The night of Evelyn's death was a nightmare I'd replayed countless times in my head, but it had always been clear to me. A random attack, a robbery gone wrong. Or was I wrong? My focus shifted back to the man in the chair. His desperate eyes pleaded with me, seeking answers I didn't have. But before I could act, a high-pitched sound pierced the silence. A timer. Somewhere, hidden in the room, it had just started counting down. The rhythmic beeping was a grim reminder that time was running out. Damn it! Panic clawed at the edges of my mind. I needed help, but calling for backup could be exactly what the mastermind wanted. It was a trap, and I was the target. As my thoughts spiraled, I forced myself to connect the dots. Who was the man in the chair? Why was he here? And more importantly, how did this tie into Evelyn's case? I approached him and ripped the tape from his mouth. He gasped, coughing, before finally managing to speak. Please help me. I didn't do anything. Calm down. Who put you here? I don't know. They said you knew. He choked on his words, his face twisted in fear. That you are the only one who can stop this. Who said that? Before he could answer, a hidden speaker crackled to life, and a distorted voice filled the room. You already have all the answers, Detective. The past doesn't stay buried for long. The message was cold, calculated, and was followed by deafening silence. My eyes returned to the man, and for the first time, something about his face seemed familiar. A flash of memory struck me. He had been at Evelyn's crime scene that night. A neighbor? A bystander? I couldn't recall, but he had been there. You were at Evelyn's scene. Who are you? I asked, my voice low but firm. He shook his head frantically, denying everything as the timer's beeping grew louder. Each second felt like a blade cutting through my thoughts. I looked back at the numbers on the door. 4,321. There had to be a connection. My mind raced as the timer's pace quickened. This was a game, and I was losing. But what I didn't yet realize was that, no matter what choice I made, the truth about Evelyn was about to shatter me in ways I could never imagine. The countdown seemed to accelerate with every passing second, a cruel reminder of my inability to control the situation. The man in the chair shook his head frantically, mumbling incoherently as tears streamed down his face. I needed answers and fast. Speak now. Who put you here? Why did they mention Evelyn? My voice was louder than I intended, but the panic was rising in my chest. He looked at me with a mix of guilt and terror, as if harboring secrets that could destroy me. I don't know, he shouted, his voice trembling. They just said I needed to be here, that you'd understand. Please, help me. But I didn't understand. The number 4,321 scrawled on the door seemed to mock me, offering a clue I couldn't decipher. I glanced at the bomb again. No wires I could cut without risking everything. No obvious panel to access. It was ingeniously simple, yet brutally effective. A relentless countdown, and a deadly trigger. The phone vibrated again. This time, it was an audio message. I took a deep breath before hitting play, and the voice that followed froze my blood. You are close, but not close enough. What happened to Evelyn was just the beginning. Don't forget, every choice has a price. The voice was distorted, but there was something familiar about it, something I couldn't quite place. Whoever they were, they knew my story, my failures, and they were determined to use them against me. Worse still, they knew exactly how to manipulate me. Suddenly, my mind flashed back to the scene at Evelyn's doorstep. The man in the chair, he had been there. I was sure of it now. "You were there the night she died," I said, more to myself than to him. "Why were you there?" He hesitated, but the fear on his face began to give way to something darker. I couldn't stop it. I saw everything, but I didn't do anything. They told me not to interfere. "Who are they?" I demanded, stepping closer, my patience wearing thin. But before he could answer, the countdown emitted a different sound-along beep that seemed to signal the end. I stepped back instinctively, but nothing happened. The sound stopped, and the silence that followed was even more terrifying. That's when I realized the countdown wasn't for the bomb, it was for something bigger. The phone vibrated again, but this time it was a call. I answered, my heart pounding. "You are getting too close, Detective. Maybe it's time to back off before someone else gets hurt." The line went dead before I could respond, and a muffled sound came from upstairs. Someone else was in the house. I tightened my grip on the gun and headed up the stairs, each step echoing in the dark hallway. The door to the master bedroom was ajar, a faint light spilling through the crack. I entered slowly, gun raised, but what I saw left me speechless. On the bed lay a wristwatch I recognized immediately. It was Evelyn's. The glass was cracked, but the hand still moved. Beside the watch was an old, partially burned photograph. In it, I stood next to Evelyn, smiling. But someone had drawn a red X over my face. My chest tightened. This wasn't just about Evelyn, it was about me. Someone was hunting me, unearthing what I'd tried to bury. Before I could process it, the sound of quick footsteps echoed down the hallway. I rushed out, but the house was empty again. Whoever it was, they knew how to disappear. When I returned to the man in the chair, he was unconscious. The bomb was still intact, but he looked like he'd been drugged or struck. I searched the room, but there were no signs of a struggle. Only a new message, written on the floor with the same charcoal used to mark the door. Those who protect also destroy. Was it a warning? An accusation? I no longer knew who to trust, not even myself. But one thing was clear. What happened to Evelyn wasn't an accident. And now, someone was willing to do whatever it took to make me pay for something I still didn't understand. I descended the stairs, my steps heavy, but my mind even heavier. The man tied to the chair was still unconscious, his breathing uneven. The bomb remained motionless, like a predator lying in wait. I looked at the number on the door again, 4,321, trying to connect the dots. There was something there, something I was missing. My phone vibrated again, jolting me out of the whirlwind of thoughts. This time, it wasn't a message or a call. It was a notification, a video sent to my personal email. The sender was anonymous. Hesitant, I clicked the link, and the footage began to play. The camera was shaky, as if it were being carried by someone on the move. The setting was dark but familiar, the park where Evelyn and I used to take our walks. The stone path, the bench beneath the large tree, it all looked exactly as I remembered it. But the video wasn't of peaceful scenery or quiet moments. It was blood. The camera focused on the ground, following a trail of red droplets that led to a lifeless body. My stomach churned as I realized I knew the victim. It was the man tied up in my living room. In the video, he was dead. "This can't be real," I muttered under my breath, staring at the man before me. He was alive, breathing, albeit unconscious. Yet the video was clear. A date and time flashed in the corner of the screen. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Was this a threat or a warning? A noise from outside the house interrupted my thoughts' footsteps. I rushed to the window, peeking through the curtains. A hooded figure was moving quickly through the yard, almost like a shadow. I opened the front door, gun in hand, but the street was empty. The night swallowed any trace of movement. Back inside, I noticed something new in the living room. A white envelope on the floor that definitely hadn't been there before. I picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of the thick paper. Inside was a single sheet with a typed message. What is hidden in the light always returns in the dark. I called the station, demanding backup, but I was met with the same excuse about staff shortages. "We're stretched thin, Alex," the sergeant said on the other end of the line. "But I'll send someone as soon as I can." I couldn't wait. I examined the envelope again, looking for fingerprints or clues, but it was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. Then I noticed something nearly imperceptible in the bottom right corner of the paper. 4 to 3, -2, -1. The numbers were everywhere, like a haunting refrain, yet they made no sense. My head throbbed as I tried to piece it all together. Evelyn, the tied-up man, the numbers, and now the video. There was a connection, but it felt like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from different games. As I walked back into the room, the man began to stir. His eyes opened slowly, more alert this time, though still haunted. "You need to listen to me," he said weakly, his voice hoarse. "They're playing with you, just like they did with me." I approached him, keeping a firm grip on the gun. "Who are they? Why are you involved in this?" He tried to sit up, but the ropes held him in place. "I was just a middleman," he said, his eyes wide with fear. "They know everything about you, Alex. Evelyn, she knew too much, and so do you." "Knew what?" The frustration in my voice erupted, but before he could answer, the bomb emitted a sharp beep. This time, it wasn't the timer. It was a different kind of alert. A secondary device? I rushed to inspect it, but the sound stopped abruptly. Then came silence. Or rather, almost silence. The faint ticking of a clock echoed in the room, but there was no clock in sight. I searched frantically for the source until I realized it was coming from beneath the floor. The sound was faint, but persistent. Something was buried there. "What's down there?" I demanded, but the man began to laugh, a nervous, desperate laugh. "It's too late," he said. "They're always one step ahead." Ignoring his ramblings, I started prying up the floorboards. The ticking grew louder as I worked. Finally, I uncovered a small metal box. It was locked, but there was writing etched onto the lid. "For those who seek answers, the truth can be fatal." My phone vibrated again. Another message, but this time it was an image. It was a photo of me, taken from outside the house at that very moment. "You are being watched." Adrenaline was like a relentless drum pounding inside me, each beat confirming I was trapped in something far bigger than it seemed. Holding the small metal box, I felt the weight of something far more than physical. It held secrets, the same ones, now threatening to consume my sanity. I turned back to the tied-up man. His expression flickered between panic and resignation, as if he were coming to terms with something inevitable. "What's inside this box?" I asked, holding it up. "If you don't want to die here, you'd better start talking." He tilted his head, his eyes fixed on my face, almost as if he were studying me. "Do you think the answers will save you? Alex, they'll only bury you deeper." Ignoring his taunt, I focused on the box. It was sturdy, with a simple yet solid lock. Forcing it open here was too risky. I grabbed my toolbox from the cabinet and tucked the box inside, planning to open it somewhere safer. But before I could take another step, the doorbell rang. That ordinary sound, meant to be harmless, sent my heart racing. I picked up my gun and crept to the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw a delivery man. He held a small package, his face partially hidden under a cap. "Delivery for Alex Carter," he said, almost mechanically, as I cracked the door open just enough for him to hear me. "Who sent this?" I asked, my finger still on the trigger. "No idea, sir. I just deliver." I took the package and watched as he walked away. When he turned the corner, I hurried to the window to get another look. He didn't get into a car. He just disappeared into the night. Odd. I locked the door and examined the package. Like the previous envelope, it had no return address. Carefully, I tore open the wrapping, revealing a cassette tape. A damn cassette tape. It was almost laughable. Who still used those things? I powered up the old tape player I kept in the basement and slid the tape in. It began with static. Then a voice I'd recognize anywhere filled the room, Evelyn's. "Alex," she began, her voice low, tinged with what sounded like fear. "If you are hearing this, it means I couldn't get away. They won't stop, you understand? They'll use you, just like they used me." The audio muffled briefly, as if she leaned closer to the microphone. "You need to get out of this now. The box contains evidence, but opening it could also kill you. They watch everything, Alex. You are just a pawn in their game." My chest tightened at the sound of her voice. I missed her, but it was more than that. Now there was guilt. Evelyn knew more than I'd ever realized, and she might have died trying to protect those secrets. Before the recording ended, a faint sound came through the tape. It was soft, but unmistakable. 3 knocks, a steady, unsettling rhythm. The same pattern I'd heard before when I discovered the clock beneath the floorboards. I bolted upstairs, still clutching the tape player. The tied-up man appeared to be sleeping, but his breathing was labored, as if he were pretending. I leaned in close to his ear. "Who are they?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. His eyes snapped open, unnervingly calm. "You already know, Alex. You just don't want to admit it." "Admit what?" He smirked. "That you are part of this, too." His words echoed in my mind like a bell. You are part of this, too. For a moment, I thought it was just another attempt at manipulation, a last-ditch effort by a cornered man. But there was something in his tone, a cold certainty that burrowed into my thoughts. What if it was true? I went down to the basement with the locked box and the tape recorder in hand. I needed privacy to piece together the fragments forming in my mind, even if they were still hazy. Evelyn's tape kept playing, emitting what sounded like static at first. But when I focused, I realized it wasn't just noise. There was a pattern, almost musical, interrupted by bursts of static. As I tried to make sense of the sound, something in the corner of the basement caught my attention. An old wooden shelf, loaded with file boxes, began to creak. At first, I thought it was the weight, but then I noticed it was moving just millimeters, but enough to be noticeable. Someone was on the other side of the wall. I turned off the lights and waited. The sound stopped and silence returned. I tried to shake off the growing paranoia, but it was no use. I grabbed my gun, now my constant companion, and prepared for whatever might come. I turned back to the locked box, examining every detail for a clue on how to open it. That's when I noticed something etched into the base, a tiny, almost invisible inscription, 0031. I tried to force the box open, but it wouldn't budge. It was clear the lock required the right key. I went back to the tied-up man. "Is the code the key to this?" I asked, holding the box close to his face. He let out a weak, almost painful laugh. "You'll never understand enough in time, Alex, but don't worry, they'll explain it to you." "Who?" I shouted, frustrated, but he didn't seem to hear me anymore. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glazed over, staring into nothing. "Talk, damn it." He muttered something, barely audible. I leaned in closer. "You are like them. You always were." Desperation surged through me. I had no idea what he meant. I felt trapped, like a chess player, only now realizing the opponent's pieces were all in checkmate positions. I needed answers fast. I rushed upstairs, pulled out my laptop, and started researching the code 0031. After hours of fruitless digging, I stumbled across something that froze me in place. It was the number of a property registered in my naming abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. How had I never known about this? The questions piled up, each more unsettling than the last. Who was I, really? I knew I had to go there. I packed my things, double-checked my gun, and prepared for the trip. But before leaving, I decided to check on the tied-up man one last time. When I got back to the basement, he was dead. A note was pinned to his chest with a tack. The letters, handwritten and simple, carried a chilling weight. "Time's up, Alex. Welcome to the next level." The sense of being watched grew stronger, suffocating. But there was no time for hesitation. I drove to the warehouse, my heart pounding like never before. The place looked deserted, a structure worn down by time and neglect. But as I got closer, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I entered cautiously, gun ready in my hands. Inside, there was a table with a single item on it, a dossier. My name was printed on the cover. As I opened it, photos and documents spilled out. And that's when the real shock hit. Photos of me at events I couldn't remember, in situations I couldn't explain. One of them showed me standing beside Evelyn, but something was off. I didn't look like myself. My expression was cold, empty. At the end of the dossier, there was a short phrase. "The man you are looking for has always been in front of you. Look in the mirror." The phrase, "look in the mirror," echoed in my mind, reverberating like a sentence. I closed the dossier with trembling hands, my heart racing. Who was I? Why was Evelyn beside me in a photo I couldn't remember taking? I glanced around the warehouse. It was empty, except for an old, dusty, and cracked mirror in one corner. It felt like an invitation, or maybe a trap. I approached cautiously, gun still in hand, as paranoia seeped into every thought. When I looked at the mirror, a chill ran through me. My reflection was there, as expected, but something felt off. My image seemed older, worn down. I blinked, trying to brush it off as fatigue, but the reflection didn't move. It stared back at me, its eyes brimming with secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. "You know, don't you?" The voice came from behind me. I spun around, aiming the gun, but no one was there. My entire body was on high alert. The mirror reflected only me and the emptiness around me. And then I heard it again. "You've always known, Alex. It's always been inside you." I was losing my mind. There was no other explanation. The phrase in the dossier, the photos, the bound man who seemed to know more about me than I did it, was like I was a piece in a puzzle I'd never realized I was assembling. I tried to back away from the mirror, but something held me in place. My feet felt glued to the floor. And then, once more, the voice spoke clearer this time, as if it came from within me. "Remember." It hit me like a lightning strike. Suddenly, my mind was flooded with flashes of memories I didn't recognize. I was in a dark room, holding a bloody knife. Evelyn was there, but she wasn't alive. The scene shifted. I was in a room filled with monitors, watching people, strangers and acquaintances. Then, another flash. I was with the man now dead in my basement. He looked at me with fear. "This isn't real. This isn't real," I shouted, clutching my temples, trying to push the images away. But the more I resisted, the stronger they became. It was as if a veil was being torn away, revealing a truth I'd suppressed for years. Each memory brought pain, not just physical, but emotional, like losing the essence of who I thought I was. Finally, the cracked mirror began to shift, its fractures widening until it seemed on the verge of shattering completely. I stepped back, my breathing ragged. But before I could react, something fell from the mirror, a small, gleaming object. A key. I picked it up, still unsure if this was part of some elaborate game, or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had to do. I got in my car and drove without thinking. I had to open the box. When I reached the basement, it felt different, darker, heavier, as if burdened by the weight of what I was about to uncover. I used the key to unlock the box. The metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Inside was a collection of items, a journal, a cassette tape, and a photo of me with Evelyn, this time clearly older, with a smile that felt forced. I opened the journal, my hands still trembling. The first words left me frozen. "You were never who you think you are." The next chapters of this nightmare were beginning to unfold, like pages of a book I wasn't ready to read. But one thing was clear. Whatever waited at the end of this road would change everything. The words in the journal seemed to glow in the darkness, as if written to haunt me. You were never who you think you are. I didn't know what to expect as I turned the next page, but I did so with a mix of dread and curiosity. The first entry was dated 5 years ago, but the handwriting was unmistakably mine. Every word, every stroke of the pen screamed that this was my doing, even though my memory insisted otherwise.
The project begins today. Evelyn thinks I am obsessed, but she doesn't understand. They need to pay. Every last one of them. And I am the only one who can make it happen. My fingers stiffened as they gripped the edges of the journal. Project? Who were they? And why was Evelyn involved in this? I flipped through more pages, and the puzzle began to come together piece by piece, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The journal detailed secret meetings, surveillance of people I barely recognized, and references to an organization called the Scarlet Vanguard. I'd never heard that name before, but it felt significant. One entry, in particular, left me stunned. Detective Alex Harper will be the perfect cover. They trust him, believe he's incorruptible. Little do they know, he's already in the game. I couldn't breathe. I was Detective Alex Harper. But what if I wasn't? What if this had all been a carefully constructed lie? My head spun with the possibilities. Who was I? Who had I become? At the bottom of the box, the cassette tape seemed to call out to me. I picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of what it might contain. An old cassette tape just as obsolete as the memories I was trying to piece together. There was a dusty tape recorder in the corner of the basement. I placed the tape inside and pressed play. A static hum filled the room, followed by a voice that froze my blood. Hello, Alex. Or should I say, 04? The voice was deep, calm, and eerily familiar. I kept listening, unable to blink. If you are hearing this, it means the plan is falling apart. You've started remembering, haven't you? I warned you the truth would hurt, but you insisted. Now, you must decide. Will you accept who you really are, or continue living in this comfortable illusion we created for you? I stopped the tape, unable to bear another second. What did he mean by illusion, and who was 04? My breathing was heavy, my thoughts tangled in a storm of unanswered questions. I turned to the evidence board I had set up in the basement. The photos, the notes, everything seemed to connect in ways I hadn't seen before. Evelyn, the bound man, the photo of us together, and now the Scarlet Vanguard. I grabbed the journal again, flipping through the pages frantically until I reached the final entry. If you've made it this far, Alex, find the red door. Red door? Asterisk. I scanned the basement, my eyes combing every corner. Then I saw it. Behind an old cabinet, something seemed out of place, a faint, almost imperceptible glow. I dragged the cabinet aside with all my strength, revealing a door painted in blood red. It had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. My heart pounded like a war drum. I placed my hand on the doorknob but hesitated. Was I ready for what lay beyond? Number, but I'd come too far to turn back. I turned the knob.
The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark corridor. The walls covered in worn, almost disintegrated wallpaper. The air was thick, heavy with a metallic scent that churned my stomach. I had no idea what I was about to find, but the adrenaline kept pushing me forward. My footsteps echoed eerily, each one seeming louder than the last. At the end of the hallway was another door, smaller, reinforced with metal plates. I grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. 3 numbers were etched at the top, like a code, 0412. The sequence triggered something in my memory. It felt familiar, yet elusive, like a word on the tip of my tongue. I picked up the diary again, flipping through it until I found the entry that seemed to make sense. 4 to remember, 12 to forget. I typed the code into the panel next to the door, my fingers hesitating before pressing the final button. When the latch clicked open, a chill ran down my spine. The door slowly creaked open, and I found myself in a room filled with screens. The screens flickered in sync, showing recordings of various people. Some I recognized as colleagues, others were total strangers. On one of the screens, Evelyn appeared, sitting in a room that looked identical to this one. She was facing away, but it was unmistakably her. Evelyn. My voice came out in a hoarse whisper. I looked around, searching for a microphone or anything that might connect me to her, but all I found was a desk with folders labeled with numbers. Number 04 was at the top of the stack. I opened the folder, my hands trembling. Inside, there was a detailed file on me, or at least what I thought was me. Photos of me in places I didn't remember being, reports on missions I didn't recognize, and a list of targets eliminated. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the last photo. Evelyn. My mind spun. What did this mean? Was she a victim, or was she involved? Before I could process it, a voice came through the room's speakers, cold and calculated. You've come too far, Alex. I always knew your curiosity would be your downfall. I recognized the voice immediately. It was my superior in the police department, Captain Reed. Reed? What the hell is all of this? I shouted, trying to maintain control. This, Alex, is who you really are. Or rather, who we made you to be. You are nothing more than a tool, a pawn in a much bigger game than you can comprehend. But now that you are uncovering everything, we have no choice but to neutralize you. A metallic click echoed behind me. I turned just in time to see a figure step out of the shadows, holding a gun pointed at my head. The face was too familiar to be real. It was like looking in a mirror. Surprise, said my copy with a crooked smile. The Scarlet Vanguard always has a backup plan. I was trapped between two realities that seemed equally insane. Either I was the victim of a well-orchestrated conspiracy, or I was complicit in something monstrous without even knowing it. And at that moment, the weight of the choice felt overwhelming. The reflection in front of me wasn't perfect. It was colder, more precise, as if every movement had been calculated in advance. My clone held the gun with an unsettling calm, his eyes locked on me. I could feel the sweat dripping down my temples, but he seemed unmoved. You must have a lot of questions, he said with a slight smile. I did too at first, but believe me, the answers aren't as comforting as you expect. I took a step back, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Who are you? What is this? Why are they doing this to me? He tilted his head, as if evaluating my words. Who am I? He repeated, almost amused. I am you, Alex, the version they created to fix all your flaws. I am what you should have been from the start. Fix my flaws? My voice echoed in the room. I am not perfect, but I am not some puppet in some weird experiment. Oh, but you are, he replied, pointing to the screens. We all are. Didn't you ever notice the holes in your memory? The missions that don't make sense? The way certain cases just disappear? His words hit like a punch to the gut. He was right. There were gaps, entire days that seemed to evaporate from my mind. I'd always blamed it on stress or lack of sleep, but now it felt much more sinister. This is Reed's doing, isn't it? I asked, trying to piece it together. He's behind all of this. His smile widened, but it was empty, almost cruel. Reed is just a pawn, just like you, just like me. The Scarlet Vanguard isn't a man or an organization, Alex. It's an idea. And ideas don't die. The gun was still aimed at me, but he didn't fire. That gave me an opening, a small one, but enough. I asked a question I knew would destabilize him. Evelyn, what's she got to do with this? He hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. She's a variable, he finally said. Something that should have been eliminated but wasn't, because you refused. My hands clenched into fists. If anything happens to her, What? You'll what? He interrupted me, laughing. You'll stop me? You'll end all of this? Alex, look around you. This is bigger than you, than both of us. You think you have any choice here? But he was wrong. I still had a choice. I always had. I remembered the code I used to open the door. 04 to remember, 12 to forget. It was more than a clue. It was a solution. Before he could react, I spun toward the control desk and started pressing random buttons. The screens began flickering wildly, alarms blared, and the room was flooded with red light. My clone shouted something, but the sound was drowned out by a metallic crash as the entrance door slammed shut automatically. "You don't understand what you are doing," he yelled, running toward me. But I was already one step ahead. I grabbed one of the folders from the desk. The label 12 glowed like a mark of destiny. I ran toward an exit I hadn't noticed before, a hatch in the floor. "Alex!" he shouted again, but I was already descending into the unknown. The last thing I heard was the echo of his voice, mingled with the sound of alarms. "You can run, but you'll never escape the truth." And for the first time, I truly believed that. The hatch opened to a narrow, dimly lit corridor with exposed pipes and a musty smell that seemed stuck to the walls. The sound of alarms above still echoed in the distance, but every step I took seemed to sink me further into an abyss of silence and loneliness. The folder with the 12 label was firmly pressed under my arm, a physical and metaphorical weight. "What are you looking for, Alex?" a voice whispered in my mind. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it. Since the lapses started, this question had always haunted me, but now it felt more real, almost as if it had been spoken aloud. I passed a series of numbered metal doors. Each one had a small reinforced glass window, but the flashing lights made it impossible to see what was behind them. One caught my attention, room 04. There was something etched beside it, nearly illegible, but it seemed to say, "Memory preserved. Restricted access." I hesitated. If 12 meant forget, 04 could be the opposite. Maybe there was something in there that would explain everything. I set the folder down and started messing with the panel beside the door, trying to force it open. The numbers on the keypad glowed red. 1 attempt, 2, 3, nothing. Desperation grew, until the panel beeped, and a mechanical voice echoed. "Access denied. Isolation protocol activated." Before I could react, I heard rapid, heavy footsteps echoing behind me. I spun around, already holding the gun I'd retrieved upstairs. The silhouette that appeared was unmistakable. Reed. But something was wrong. He looked injured, his right hand pressed to his side, blood staining his shirt. "Alex," he said, struggling to speak, gasping for air. "You need to get out of here. Now." "You think I trust you? After all this?" My voice came out harsh, but inside, I was shaking. "You don't understand," he insisted, leaning against the wall. "This goes beyond me, beyond you. They don't just want to control your mind, they want to replace you." My heart raced. My clone's words echoed in my head. "I am you, the corrected version." Is this what Reed was trying to say? That they were eliminating the defective versions? "Why should I believe you?" I asked, keeping the gun aimed. He laughed bitterly, spitting blood on the floor. "You think I am not disposable too? Why do you think they put me here? I was the first failed experiment, Alex. I only survived because I found a way to escape." Before I could respond, he held out a small golden key toward me. "Room 04. All the answers are there, but you need to hurry. They're coming." I took the key, hesitating. "And you? What will you do?" He gave a weak smile. "I've done my part. Go." I ran back to the door of room 04, inserting the key into the panel. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside, shutting it behind me. What I saw inside took my breath away. It was like stepping into my own mind, but organized into drawers and files. Photographs of moments I didn't remember, detailed reports of missions I never undertook, and recordings of myself. In each, I looked different, more mechanical, as if I weren't really me. In the center of the room, an old monitor glowed with a simple message. "Welcome, Unit 04. Relive to understand. Forget to survive. My hands trembled as I read. What did this mean? It was becoming clearer that I was a piece in a larger game, but what was the ultimate goal? Outside, I heard footsteps drawing closer. There was no time for doubts anymore. I chose the only option that made sense. I pressed the relive button. The monitor flickered, and then the screen filled with images. Images I never wanted to see. The avalanche of images on the screen was overwhelming. Each scene unfolded with disconcerting clarity, and I couldn't tell if I was watching a recording or reliving repressed memories. There I was, sitting in a sterile white room, surrounded by men and women in lab coats. The identification tags on their pockets only had one logo, Molecular Instinct Corporien, a name I had never heard before, but one that seemed ingrained in my subconscious. Unit 04, are you ready for the final integration? Asked a male voice. It was cold, methodical, as if conducting a routine experiment. My replica in the recording nodded, its expression calm and submissive. I am ready. Suddenly, another memory flooded the screen. I was in a dark room, facing a figure that seemed to be me. The clothes were different, but the features, posture, and even the mannerisms were identical. I watched, hypnotized, as we argued. My other self gestured frantically, while I, whoever I was in that position, maintained a calm, analytical posture. They're erasing everything, my other self said, his voice barely a desperate whisper. You are not who you used to be. Everything you believe, all your memories, they're edited versions of the truth. I snapped back to reality. The images disappeared, and the monitor now displayed only one sentence: acknowledge what was lost to regain control. The tension in the room was almost palpable. My hands were sweaty, and my heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. Who was I really? Were the memories real or fabricated? Reed had mentioned this was all part of an experiment, but what kind of experiment creates a perfect replica of someone and uses it for? What? A metallic sound from outside snapped me back to reality. Someone was trying to open the door. I grabbed the folder marked 12 and tucked it under my arm, ready to fight if necessary. The door was broken open with a crash. The lights flickered, revealing 3 figures entering with guns aimed. 2 guards and a woman with an austere look, her hair tied up in a tight bun. Her eyes locked on me, like a predator sizing up its prey. Alex, she said, her voice dripping with authority, you found more than you should have, but we can still fix this. I laughed, a dry, almost desperate sound. Fix? You turned me into a walking experiment. Why should I trust anything you say? She stepped forward, unafraid, because you have no choice. Everything you've seen, everything you think you know, is only a fraction of the truth. But here is still time for you to align with the purpose you were created for. And what would that purpose be? I asked, keeping the gun steady. Elimination. The word left her lips like a shot, sharp and cold. You are a perfected prototype, the next step in human control evolution. Your mission was to identify and neutralize those who threaten our order, without hesitation or failure. But something went wrong. Something went wrong. My voice rose. You took everything from me, my memories, my life, my identity. And now you want me to blindly follow your orders? She gestured to the guards, who lowered their weapons. It surprised me, but only for a moment. I am not here to convince you, she continued. I am here to make sure you don't leave this building with information you can't comprehend. At that moment, Reed staggered into the room, his face pale from pain. Alex, don't listen to her. He pleaded, she's the mastermind behind all of this. If you want answers, you'll have to face her now. The internal conflict consuming me intensified. Shooting her might be the only way to stop the cycle. But what if she was telling the truth? What if I really was something more? something dangerous. My decision had to be swift. The weight of the past, the revelations, and the uncertainty felt overwhelming. The silence that followed was suffocating. Reed leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, while the woman with her hair tied up kept a fixed, impenetrable gaze on me. My fingers itched on the trigger, but the uncertainty was an overwhelming weight on my chest. What she had said, could it be true? Or was it just another attempt at manipulation? My mind filled with flashes of memory-blurred images that seemed to toy with my sanity. My mother's face smiling in the kitchen, my first police badge, the sound of sirens in the streets. Memories that used to be solid now felt as volatile as smoke. "Alex," Reed called, his voice weak but determined. "Don't fall for her game. If you give in, you'll never find out who you really are." "And if I don't give in?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the woman. She stepped forward, challenging. "You become a risk, a mistake that needs to be corrected." I swallowed hard. It seemed like there were only two options, fight or flee. But something in the way she spoke, in the certainty of her gestures, told me there was a third possibility. A buried truth that could change everything. "Explain," I demanded. "Why me? Why turn a cop into whatever I am now?" She raised an eyebrow, almost as if surprised by my question. "Because you were the perfect candidate. Smart, morally flexible, with a history that allowed us to manipulate you without raising suspicion. You were trained to follow orders and question later. But we didn't count on one thing. Your memory resisted complete erasure. And that made you unpredictable." Morally flexible? My voice was a whisper, filled with disbelief. "You turned me into a weapon without my consent, and now you want to blame me for resisting." She smiled coldly. "Resistance wasn't in the plan, but it's fascinating to watch. You can keep fighting, Alex, or you can join us and find a greater purpose. The choice is yours." Suddenly, Reed let out a bitter laugh, interrupting the moment. "She's lying, Alex. She always has. You weren't chosen for what you were, but for what you knew. They needed to erase you because you were getting too close to something that could dismantle this whole operation." I turned to Reed, confused. And what is that? What did I know? He coughed, spitting blood. "That molecular instinct corp and is using people as lab rats to create obedient soldiers. You were about to expose it all before you got caught." What do you think was in case 417? It was the beginning of all this. The woman rolled her eyes, impatient. "Enough," she said, pointing to one of the guards. "Finish this." But before the guard could act, Reed raised his arm, revealing an improvised wrist grenade. "Alex, run!" he shouted, activating the device. The explosion wasn't big, but the impact was enough to knock everyone to the ground. My vision blurred as alarms blared throughout the building. Reed lay motionless on the floor, and the woman had vanished in the chaos. My mind was in turmoil. The pieces were there, but the puzzle still didn't make sense. I grabbed the folder marked 12 again and ran, weaving through the destroyed hallways, hearing the footsteps of the guards coming after me. When I reached the emergency exit, something stopped me. A sign, covered in dust but still legible. Experimental Containment Area. The name was direct and terrifying. Whatever was behind that door, it seemed like the final answer. The doors to the Experimental Containment Area creaked open. The air inside was thick, heavy with a chemical smell that burned at the back of my throat. Every step echoed down the narrow corridor, which seemed to stretch on endlessly before me. The lighting was dim, and shadows danced on the walls, playing tricks on my paranoia. I knew I couldn't go back. Not after everything I'd discovered. Not with Reed sacrificing his life to give me this chance. Now, everything depended on me. His words echoed in my mind. "You were too close to the truth." At the end of the corridor, a large room revealed itself, filled with massive glass tubes that stretched from floor to ceiling. Each one contained something that looked human, but wasn't. Their closed eyes, pale skin, and dark veins pulsing in a strange rhythm. It was as if they were alive and dead at the same time. In the center of the room, an operating table gleamed under a spotlight, papers scattered across it. I approached carefully, every muscle in my body on high alert. The papers were covered in medical notes and detailed diagrams of human modifications. But what caught my attention was a name written at the top of one of the documents. Project Genesis, Subject 417, Alex Carter. My heart stopped. I grabbed the file with trembling hands, flipping through the pages quickly. The information was devastating. I wasn't just a victim of this operation. I was the center of it. The first successful experiment. My past, my career, everything had been manipulated to create the illusion that I was just another cop dealing with a tough case. The reality was much darker. "You've always been special, Alex." Her voice sliced through the silence, making me spin instinctively, gun in hand. The woman was standing there, serene, as if she already knew what I'd discovered. "Why me?" I asked, my voice choking. "Why create this charade? Why play with my life?" She stepped forward, unafraid. "You had the perfect profile. Determined but broken. Smart but controllable. And above all, no one would miss you. We chose you because we could. And because we needed to prove this worked before expanding." "Expand?" My mind spun with the implications. "You plan to do this to other people?" She smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "We already are. You are just the prototype. Now, imagine a world where obedience is not optional, where everyone is programmed to serve a greater purpose." My fingers tightened on the trigger, but I hesitated. Shooting her wouldn't solve anything. I needed to stop this at its root, expose the truth to the world. And then, as if reading my thoughts, she spoke. "Even if you kill me, Alex, the project will continue. You think you are a hero, but you are just another pawn on the board. The difference is, you have a choice. You can join us, or try to destroy something much bigger than you'll ever understand." The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Reinforcements were coming. There was no time to think. I shot at the control panels around, destroying the systems that kept the tubes running. Alarms blared, lights flashing red. The beings inside the tubes began to writhe, as if waking from a nightmare. The woman gave me a look of pure hatred. "You've just made a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life." Before I could react, she disappeared down the corridor. I knew she wasn't fleeing out of fear. She was retreating to continue the game at another level, in another place. The tube started cracking, and viscous liquid leaked across the floor. I ran for the exit as the room behind me exploded in chaos. Each step felt heavier, each breath harder. When I finally reached the outside, the sound of sirens was deafening. I was free, but the weight of the truth was crushing. There was no victory there, only survival. I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And so, once again, the past resurfaces, forcing us to confront the ghosts we tried to bury. The detective is back at the start of a case that seemed solved, but the mystery is never as simple as it appears. The truth may be even darker than we imagined, and the puzzle pieces, hidden in the shadows, are waiting to be uncovered. If you were as intrigued as we are, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next chapter promises even more mysteries, and you won't want to miss it. The suspense is just beginning. Until then,